Welcome to this explainer. If you've been following global economic trends lately, you know wealth concentration is a massive topic right now, and Oxfam's Inequality Inc. report puts some very specific data to that narrative. Today, we're neutrally examining the numbers behind global wealth disparities and unpacking the mechanics of corporate monopoly power. We're going to dive into exactly what the data says about how extreme wealth actually functions in our modern economy.
To do this, we'll break our analysis down into 5 parts today, starting with the growing wealth gap in a decade of division, looking at the new monopoly era, seeing how corporations fuel inequality, examining the climate and tax toll, and finally, wrapping up with some real steps for reinventing the global economy.
So let's kick things off with Part 1, a decade of division.
Oxfam's data reveals a totally staggering reality. Since 2020, a time when the world was dealing with a historic pandemic, global conflict, and skyrocketing inflation, the 5 richest men literally doubled their fortunes to $869 billion. But here's the kicker. While wealth absolutely exploded at the very top, nearly 5 billion people, that is 60% of humanity, actually grew poorer. We're looking at this incredible, immediate split in financial realities happening all at the exact same time.
To put that crazy trajectory into perspective, Oxfam estimates we could see our very first trillionaire in just 10 years. 10 years! Yet on the flip side of that same coin, it would take 230 years to end global poverty. Think about that timeline for a second. It just brilliantly highlights the report's core thesis. The mechanisms of wealth creation at the very top are completely outpacing global economic development at the bottom.
And this isn't just about numbers. The report really humanizes this divide by spotlighting specific examples. Take Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, whose personal wealth shot up by $32.7 billion since 2020. Contrast that with someone like Reverend Ryan Brown, an Amazon warehouse worker in North Carolina. The report details how he faces grueling, monotonous conditions just fighting for a basic living wage. I mean, billionaires are literally reaching new heights in space, while the frontline workers powering those very empires are facing an entirely different daily reality.
And you know, this squeeze on the working class is truly global. Take a listen to the first-hand accounts of seafood processing workers like Susie in Southeast Asia. Her experience supplying food to supermarkets owned by these same megacorporations is deeply concerning. She says there wasn't even time to rest or grab a drink of water. It shows how extreme wealth at the top often relies on highly strained and sometimes exploitative labor conditions at the very base of our global supply chains.
All right, moving on to Part 2, the new monopoly era.
So how exactly did this massive wealth concentration happen so fast? Well, looking at the very top of the economy, the data is just eye-opening. 7 of the world's 10 largest public corporations are fundamentally controlled by either a billionaire CEO or a principal shareholder. We're talking about companies holding an absolutely massive combined value of $10.2 trillion. The crucial takeaway here is that extreme wealth isn't just passive money sitting in a bank account somewhere. It represents highly concentrated, active control over the global market.
And this monopoly power isn't just a tech or finance thing. Consider the global seed market. Back in 1997, 10 companies controlled 40% of the market. Today, that same slice is controlled by just 2 megacorporations. 2. We see the exact same trend in pharma, where 60 firms merged into just 10 giants over time. This level of consolidation gives these remaining corporations immense power to dictate prices and terms without worrying about real competition.
Which brings us right into Part 3, how corporations fuel inequality. To explain how this translates into real-world disparity, Oxfam isolates 4 specific tactics: rewarding the wealthy instead of workers, dodging taxes, privatizing public services, and driving climate breakdown. These are basically interconnected levers that, according to the report, systematically funnel wealth upwards while pushing the costs, burdens, and risks down onto the rest of us.
First up, let's look at labor. Corporations systematically suppress wages to maximize shareholder returns. Over a recent 2-year period, as inflation absolutely soared, something I'm sure we all felt at the grocery store, workers globally effectively lost $1.5 trillion because their pay just failed to keep up with the cost of living. So you have booming city skylines built on record corporate profits right alongside marginalized workers struggling to get by, like Mariam and Molly. The report emphasizes that this wage suppression disproportionately impacts women and racialized groups globally.
To really wrap your head around the scale of this wage disparity, consider the number 1,200. Oxfam calculates that it would take a female health and social worker 1,200 years to earn what a top Fortune 100 CEO makes on average in a single year. Let that sink in. If she had started working in the Middle Ages, she'd just be catching up today.
When we talk about extreme inequality, this is exactly the kind of astronomical structural gap the data points to.
Now, let's look at the bigger picture in Part 4, the climate and tax toll.
The first part of this massive macroeconomic toll is taxation. Through aggressive tax planning and, the sophisticated use of tax havens, corporations have effectively more than halved their statutory tax rates in OECD countries since 1980. This sustained push against taxation deprives governments of literally trillions of dollars in revenue. And remember, every dollar dodged is a dollar that isn't fixing the potholes in your town, hiring local nurses, or building schools.
At the same time, corporate power is intimately tied to climate breakdown. The data paints a stark picture here. The richest 1% of the global population emits as much carbon pollution as the poorest 2/3 of humanity combined. That's huge. The report argues that these monopolistic entities often profit heavily from processes that drive emissions while actively using their vast financial influence to resist a fast, fair transition to green energy.
The report also highlights a really concerning trend, the privatization of essential public services. Massive private equity firms are increasingly stepping in to extract profits from basic human needs, everything from local water systems to elder care and nursing homes. This effectively commodifies basic rights like education and healthcare, and deeply impoverishes those who simply cannot afford to pay out-of-pocket fees to private entities just to survive.
Finally, let's shift gears to Part 5, reinventing the global economy.
Despite all these grim statistics, the analysis doesn't just stop at diagnosing the problem. Oxfam concludes with a specific blueprint to dismantle this oligarchy. The roadmap involves 3 practical steps: revitalizing state power, strictly regulating corporate behavior, and fundamentally reinventing the business model itself. It's really all about shifting the balance of power from private boardrooms back to public institutions.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, to revitalize the state, governments need to aggressively guarantee public services and even explore creating public options in sectors like energy. To regulate corporations, the report calls for actively breaking up private monopolies, legally empowering trade unions, and putting hard caps on CEO pay. Finally, to reinvent business, governments are urged to use their massive purchasing power to prioritize fair trade models and worker cooperatives over traditional businesses driven purely by shareholder returns.
To anchor all these policy steps and provide a clear solution, world-leading economists cited in the report argue governments should set a tangible, measurable target. One idea they propose is achieving a PALMA of 1. This essentially means structuring the economy so that the bottom 40% of the population earns around the same total income as the richest 10%. It's a clear, mathematical goal for policymakers trying to bring society back to a much healthier balance.
The ultimate question Oxfam's data forces us to ask is this: will society passively accept this new gilded age of division controlled by monopolists, or will we push to reinvent the global economy using transformative public power so it actually works for all of us? It's a profound question to leave you with, and it certainly highlights why tracking these global economic data points matters to every single one of us. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep asking the hard questions.